Welcome to the virtual office hours. My name is John Fia. I'm the chair of the history department and I teach American history here at Messiah College. I think this is part 8 of the virtual office hours. Last week, you remember, we had a special edition of the office hours with Jeffrey Harpham from the National Humanities Center in North Carolina. We're back. It's just me. Actually, Sloan is on break, so we have Megan here filming. Megan, let's see, we put your hand in front of the camera. There she is. Yes, that's a tradition with Sloan. He always does that. I have the Founding Fathers back with me. Actually, someone emailed me last week and said, where were the Founding Fathers during your interview with Harpham? So they're here, and the Pez dispensers are back. So again, thanks for watching. I also want to give a little bit of a shout out here to Catherine Jewell, who teaches American history at Fitchburg State University in Massachusetts. She has been using the virtual office hours in her classes to help her students think about historical thinking skills and so forth. So shout out to her. Thanks. I'm so glad that these are useful. I mean, that was the whole point of making these videos, to try to get some people to perhaps utilize these things in the classroom or in their work with students. Today, we want to focus on the idea of moral criticism in history, or the relationship between history and ethics. Should historians be responsible or in the practice of critiquing the past, morally critiquing the past? There is a retired Notre Dame history professor named Robert Gleason, who wrote a very interesting article about this whole topic, in which he argued that historians have a threefold task. One, they are to explain to public audiences and to their students and to their readers what happened. So the first thing, what happened? What are the events of the past? Secondly, they need to ask why what happened. Historians are not only about the past, but they're about interpreting the past and explaining the past for public audiences. And then Gleason adds a third category, which is a historian should not only ask what happened, why it happened, but was what happened good? And it's at this point, I would think, I mean, we can debate this, but I think at this point, as I argue, Gleason moves away from the traditional task of the historian and adds a sort of ethical dimension to what the historian does. In other words, by asking whether something is good, you are inevitably engaging in the discipline of moral philosophy. And the question then is, should historians be engaging in this kind of moral reflection? Is our primary goal just understanding of the past, or should we be talking about whether or not something that happened in the past is indeed good or not? I'm a little cautious and a little skeptical about getting too moralistic in the teaching of the past. Let me give you an example of this. Like, let's just say you're talking about 19th century slavery. Now, if I'm teaching my class as a historian, and I give my students documents to read by 19th century slaveholders, those intellectuals who would defend the idea of slavery, most of the natural behavior of students, or of anybody, would be to immediately realize that these slaveholders were wrong, that these slaveholders maybe were not properly interpreting the Bible or understanding Christianity the right way. It would be to morally condemn these people. Now again, I'm not saying we shouldn't morally condemn slaveholders. It's an abominable institution. It's a scar on the history of America. But is it our responsibility as historians to lead with that moral criticism? I'm imagining if I were to allow my students to lead with moral criticism in our discussion of those documents, we would all agree, yes, these people were bad, here's why they were bad, here's why slavery is wrong. We'd all feel pretty good about ourselves, I think, in the course of the discussion. I'm guessing everybody would have something to say because they can all sort of pile on these slaveholders. But I think we might leave after those 50 minutes, leave the class feeling very good about our sort of moral rectitude, but not necessarily knowing more about the world in which these slaveholders lived. we would be so concerned about condemning them that we wouldn't empathize with them. We wouldn't understand what it was about 19th century Southern culture that allowed these slaveholders, or that led these slaveholders to believe that slavery was right. So I think when we deal with ethics in history, condemning the past, or even exalting certain people in the past, we need to be careful. And I think there's a danger of moving beyond our vocation as historians and start doing something else that maybe might be in the bailiwick, so to speak, of another kind of humanities discipline. So I'm an advocate of, again, cautiously bracketing our convictions when we look at the past. This is very, very difficult to do since we're all moral beings. We all have serious opinions upon what is right and wrong and who is right and wrong in the past. But the historian's role requires a certain degree of discipline to bracket those convictions and try to understand the historical actors that we face on their own terms and understand why they behaved in the way they did without superimposing our own morality upon them. Now, granted, as I just said, we are all moral beings. It's very, very hard to do this work of bracketing. It's very, very hard to take our contemporary convictions out of the mix when we interpret the past. And I'm not suggesting that we should do this. But if we are going to engage in moral interpretation of the past, let me suggest very quickly 5 things that we should always keep in mind as we approach the past in a sort of moral or ethical way. One, I think, and I've already sort of discussed this, one, I think, it is the historian's responsibility primarily to understand before casting moral judgment. This, I think, is a fundamental part of what it means to think historically. I think moral criticism is certainly fair game in our books that we write, in our classes that we teach, in our exhibits that we present as public historians, and in all the work that we do as historians. I think there's a place for moral criticism, but it's a secondary place. You know, I want my students to be able to understand the world of the 19th century slaveholder, why the slaveholder thought in the way that he did, before they go ahead and condemn them. So I think understanding must always come before moral criticism. Second thing I think we realize, and we need to realize if we're going to engage in this kind of ethical reflection on the past, is we can't be too preachy. It's very easy to preach our way through the past, rather than trying to interpret the past on its own terms. My colleague here at Messiah College, Jim LeGrand, has a great essay in our book, Confessing History, called Preaching Through History. And it's very, very easy to sort of move through history looking for moral lessons, condemning this person, not condemning that person, praising this person for their moral stature, I should say, or something to that effect. But if we're after understanding, the moral lessons must come second, or come after the understanding. Third, I think if you're going to engage in moral interpretations or in moral critiques of the past, you better make sure that you understand, you have some kind of source of morality, or you have a depth of moral thinking when you do this. I see this a lot in sort of Christian churches, and the way Christians tend to, some of my fellow Christians tend to do history, right? Hitler is evil. Or the Declaration of Independence must be a Christian document because it has God in it. You know, or Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, so he must be a believer of some type. I mean, these are all sort of knee-jerk moral reactions that do not necessarily think about the complexity of the human experience. We'll get to complexity in a second. But rather they're just sort of Sunday school-like Bible proof texting, or ethical sort of gestures that say, well, that person's right, that person's wrong, without any deep reflection or context for doing that. So I think we want to have mature moral thinking when we bring morality to bear on the past. Fourth, I think, historians need to realize that they always are making moral judgments on the past. But I think a good historian makes them implicitly rather than explicitly. We recently had the Pulitzer Prize winning historian Annette Gordon-Reed on campus talking about her book about Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson, about their relationships. The Hemingses of Monticello is the title of the book. And one of the things that struck me about Annette Gordon Reed was the way she told the story. She told the story in a sort of accurate way. She told the story about Thomas Jefferson using his power to possibly have children with his slaves. She talked about the powerlessness of Sally Hemings and the Hemings family at Monticello. Most people realized that this was a story laden with morality. It was a story about corruption. It was a story about manipulation. It was a story about white power over black slaves. But Annette Gordon Reed just told the story. She helped us to better understand Jefferson. She helped us to better understand Sally Hemings. Now, I think everybody who was in the audience that day left with some kind of sense of morality, that what happened there may have been wrong. But Gordon Reed was not there to preach. She was not there to make explicit moral condemnations of Jefferson or even explicit moral praise for Sally Hemings. Instead, she was there to tell a story about the past and help us to understand a world, the 18th century Virginia slave system, that was different than ours. Nevertheless, the morality, the moral tale in the story was implicit by simply telling the story. I think a lot of times that's what historians forget. We're so busy wanting to preach that we forget that our stories ourselves are full of moral lessons, and people will take those away. And then finally, the fifth thing you need to realize, if you're going to engage in moral criticism, is understand the complexity of human beings. Understand that someone like Thomas Jefferson, is this him? Yeah, Thomas Jefferson, clearly is a man who believes in liberty. He believes in freedom. He's the author of the Declaration of Independence. He is the author of the Virginia Statute of Religious Liberty. Yet at the same time he owed slaves. Again, we can condemn him for his slaveholding. But that condemnation must always be understood in the larger life of Jefferson and the complexity. So history is ultimately going to breed these kinds of paradoxes and ironies, and we see the tragic dimensions of life in the process. And we always need to understand when we condemn people that people are complex, and that we need to understand these people in all their fullness rather than simply condemning them and writing them out of the historical record or not giving them the time of day. So just some thoughts here about how to think morally about the past, the dangers of thinking morally about the past, and some suggestions for how to do it in a responsible way. A lot of these ideas will soon be out in my book, Why Study History, reflecting on the importance of the past. I think we'll have an image of the cover there that you can look at. It'll be out in September. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. A lot of these ideas that you find in the virtual office hours will have found their way into that book, and I think it'll work well with students and anyone who wants to think about historical thinking. So thanks for being with us again on the office hours, and we will see you next week.